Judith Aronson Ramos, MD, is the Medical Director of Development and Behavioral Pediatrics of South Florida. Specializing in early prevention and diagnosis, she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the Autism Channel. Here is Dr. Judy.
Welcome to the Dr. Judy Show. Today we have as our guest Daniel Heinlein. He is the host of the I Am Autistic Show. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. Thanks for turning the tables on me here.
My pleasure. So we want to discuss a little bit about your story to get started. As you know, the focus of my show is on early intervention.
Right.
And I understand you were diagnosed late in life.
About as late as can be, yeah. I started off going to gifted school because I was speaking and writing and reading at a very early age, and things were going along pretty well at the Creative Children's Academy.
Okay.
And then when I shifted over to public school, a lot of the idiosyncrasies that would be associated with Asperger's, some of the, the flailing and the obsessions and the social awkwardness really started standing out in that setting.
Now, what year, what time are we talking about?
Okay, preschool to first grade at the gifted school, so it'd be 1990 through 93.
Okay, so at the public school in the early years, there were no concerns or red flags raised by teachers or staff?
Well, there was one red flag, but it was a faulty red flag because it was for ADHD.
Okay.
In third grade, so that would be 94, 95, my teacher had decided that I must certainly have ADD, as they were calling it then, because I was nervous and I was flapping my arms and doing all those things because I was just bored with the class. So she kind of railroaded my family into going to a psychiatrist who would prescribe me Ritalin.
Okay.
And that, made me sit still and everything like they wanted, but it didn't really cure any of the other autism problems.
So the assumption was that you had ADHD.
Yeah.
And you were treated. And then what happened in the middle school, high school years? Because those tend to be socially very difficult times. And did your family feel entirely comfortable with the ADHD diagnosis at that point?
No, I think by the time I got out of third grade, they had realized that was probably a mistake. And not that things were smooth sailing in middle school, they're not for anybody, but they're especially bad for me. That's, I think, middle school is when I really went off the rails in terms of doing my homework every day.
Okay.
And from there, once the grades really start counting, that's when you get the angry phone calls from the teachers. Dan doesn't do his homework. Dan doesn't do anything for class. I mean, he talks in class. And
did you have friends at that point? When you think back now in middle school, did you have children who?
I had people who tolerated my presence. I had maybe 2 or 3 really good friends, and that was about it.
Okay.
I was not as social as anybody else. And I tried to go to the weekly dances at the Y and everything, but no one would dance with me, and no one really wanted to have anything to do with me. I just sort of drifted through it.
All right, well, we'll be back in a few moments and discuss a little more. Thank you.
This is the Autism Channel.
To email Dr. Judy, send to drjudy@theautismchannel.tv. Now back to Dr. Judy.
Welcome back to the Dr. Judy Show. We're talking with Daniel Heinlein. So Daniel, we were talking about the progression from middle school to high school. What happened to you during those years?
Yeah, well, middle school, it was pretty tough with all the social aspects, but I think by 8th grade was when I just decided I was so tired of always failing to live up to expectations. My grades were always terrible, and the conferences were always traumatic for my parents, and they cried when they had to go to them and get yelled at. By 8th grade, I think I just stopped caring entirely and really started acting out and just being really terrible to teachers, more than I could ever recall being. And from high school, that things got tougher because the grades really started counting. And
now in high school, the assumption was you were a bright young man with ADHD who just had behavior problems.
Yeah, I think it was just behavior, or didn't want to be there, thought he was too good for the room, any number of things. No one was really sure what the problem was.
Now, did your parents seek professional help at that point? Was there anyone who was guiding your family other than the person prescribing your medication?
Well, I was off medication after 3rd grade.
Oh,
so
okay.
From here on, I was just completely unmedicated. But no, I don't think there was any sort of counseling, and maybe there should have been, because they were under terrible stress, and was a lot of tension in my family, if I can mention that now.
Now, were you in a rural area? Why was there such a lack of?
Yes. By this time I had moved from Arlington Heights, which is like maybe 20 miles northwest of Chicago, up to Lake Geneva, which is cottage country for Chicago. And it is quite rural, and it probably wasn't suited to me nor my family, and the sort of services that you might get somewhere downtown or even in the suburbs weren't available to me.
Now, you have a brother or a sister?
I have a younger sister.
Okay. And how far apart are the two of you in age?
She's 4 years younger than I am.
Was she a source of support for you? Was it beneficial? Was it helpful at all? Or?
Well, she looked up to me for a long time,
Okay.
but I always had trouble with, just the attention, that sometimes she would get more attention than I did, and I would get upset about that. And she never had any of the problems in school that I did. She'd get her homework, she'd study, she'd do well, and she'd go through the cycle as you're expected to in school, and that was it. Whereas I couldn't, and that just drove me up a wall, because I would help her with her homework, I would help write her papers, and she could just get through the whole thing and do all these things that I couldn't. Just made me really mad.
Now, earlier, I was reviewing some videotape
Yes.
of your early years when you were 2 years old and then again at 5 years old. And looking at this now as a professional, there were some very classic characteristics
I believe it.
that you had, including what we call hyperlexia, learning to read at a very young age, having some of these cognitive skills that we don't expect, some of the behaviors you did.
The hand thing.
The hand flapping, the rote manner of speaking, and some of the ability you had to read and understand material that just wouldn't be expected at that age.
Right.
What finally led to your diagnosis? Because you were diagnosed at 19, is that correct?
17.
17.
17.
Okay.
During my senior year of high school, my parents had finally started doing some research as to what could possibly be wrong with me, because my grades weren't getting any better. It was starting to get pretty scary as to if I would get into college at all, and if I did, what would I do when I got there? And they happened upon Asperger's syndrome, and they said, they went down the checklist and said, this is it. And so when it came time for me to go off to school over at Northern Illinois University, they had me go to some state agency, and I was diagnosed, and he said, yep, this is classic Asperger's. I can't believe they didn't find this out sooner.
So essentially it was your parents
Yes.
who led the way and figured out the diagnosis.
Yeah, they had to. There wasn't much else.
Yeah. Now, what have been the biggest challenges for you over the years? Since you were diagnosed late, when you were diagnosed and when you were told, was it an epiphany for you? Did it make sense? Was it an aha moment, or?
It was a little bit. I didn't want to admit it at first, because when you go through life thinking that you're gifted, the idea of something you have, a developmental disorder is kind of off. You don't want to think about it.
Okay.
Especially when you're in high school and all you're thinking about is to achieve and to achieve, to achieve. You don't want to think something might be wrong with me.
So initially, did you reject the diagnosis?
Yeah, I laughed and said, that's silly, there's no such thing. I went back up to my room. But then I feel, yeah, that's it.
Now, how was it explained to you? Because today, we have the benefit of a lot more information, a lot more people who have gone through this road, and we use what's called a strengths-based perspective when we talk to families and kids about their disability, and even talk about it as a difference more than a disability.
Yeah.
So what gave you hope? What helped guide you? What helped you understand that there can be an upside to this?
Well, they always talked about how, they say that Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein and all these people had Asperger's syndrome, so you're in good company.
Right.
And I sort of resented that, because Thomas Jefferson and Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein didn't have to figure out who they would go to the prom with and how they would do their AP tests and go through all the mundanities of public school life. So that frustrated me. But at the same time, I realized, I am special. I am not like other people, and I should just make the best of it as best I can.
Right.
Now here again is Judith Aronson Ramos. Dr. Judy.
Share with me a little bit about how you explain or factor in the Asperger's diagnosis today in your everyday life.
Well, it actually doesn't come in. I don't have the ask me about my Asperger's button pinned to my lapel everywhere I go, so it's kind of invisible, and I kind of like it that way sometimes. When I'm doing my radio copywriting gig, it works in my favor that I've got these skills that come with Asperger's, that if someone needs a piece of copy turned around in like half an hour, I can do that. And they say, hey Dan, can you write a piece of copy for a carpet cleaning place? And a couple minutes later, I've done a parody of The Night Before Christmas about getting your carpets cleaned. So people kind of appreciate that. And if I didn't have Asperger's, I probably couldn't sit and do that on a quick turnaround.
Now, something parents of young children always want to know, they always ask me to pull out my crystal ball and tell them what's going to happen to my son or my daughter. Will they go to school? Will they graduate from college? Will they have relationships?
Yeah.
And whether or not a child is going to go on and have a life where they're going to be close to other people, get married, have kids of their own. Ironically, that's a concern of parents of young children. So what advice would you offer to parents in understanding that about their own children?
Well, I would say that you're going to find someone out there for your child, and it's not going to be easy.
Right.
And if you think back to like the days of like the old musicians unions, where the musicians couldn't go in through the front door, they always had to enter through the back door or the side door. That's kind of how life with Asperger's is. You find that you get very used to going through the side door. So maybe you won't get to go to a bar and meet this perfect girl and just strike up a conversation. Maybe you have to go on the internet, work the back channels, and find someone who has some similar interest and cultivate something from there. I mean, that's what I ended up doing. And even then, you know, it still might not be perfect because there are family issues at stake and there are lots of other things. But there's no
It's great advice.
There's no reason to believe that you won't be able to get a job or you won't be able to have a girlfriend or eventually a wife. It'll work out.
Right, right. And we'll be back in just a moment with a little more with Daniel.
You're watching the Autism Channel.
Good?
That'll work.
That all right? Okay.
Okay.
Ready?
From the studios of the Autism Channel,
Okay.
we return to
Ready?
Dr. Judy.
Sometimes Asperger's can be a hidden disability. Individuals can look much like you, who you look like everybody else. You can converse, make eye contact.
Walk a little funny though.
So share with us a story I know about when your grandmother went to view a public service announcement you had done for the Autism Society.
Right. Well, back in February, Flying Pig Ranch sent me down to do these PSAs for the Autism Society, where I would speak about myself and what I do and say, I am more than my autism, and we are all more than our autism. And it really seemed well received. I got a lot of positive feedback from people I knew who saw me. I got texts every day, I just saw you on a movie screen, and it was really cool. And my grandma went to see it, and she went in, she said, look, I don't want to see the movie, I don't need a ticket, but my grandson is doing these PSAs, and I really want to see them. So the guy said, okay. So he lets her in, and she watches the PSA, and she's duly impressed, and she walks back out. The guy says to her, you know what, he doesn't have autism. Someone in my family has autism. I know what it is. That's not it. He's lying. He's faking it.
Now this is a huge challenge for parents of young children because of the diversity in the autism world, and we call it the autism spectrum for a reason. There's such a variety of abilities. And sometimes I tell parents it's difficult because kids who do well, sometimes we diagnose kids early, and by age even 8 or 9 today, with all the therapies we have, they're doing well. And we say that they can be penalized by their success because features remain. And I know for you, who would be considered an individual who's done well, there are still characteristics and things that make life challenging. And it can be very hard to persevere through that. I'm not sure if you have advice for our viewers.
Yeah, I would just say to just persevere and just be thankful that you don't have someone doubting you in front of you like that. I was like, if I were there, I would have said, do you want me to furnish a list of all the difficulties I've
Watch
had?
the video when you were a child?
Would you like to see me flapping my arms and memorizing words I didn't really know? But I would just say that, you know, be thankful for your achievements and don't take it to mean that, you know, your autism's been cured or that you're succeeding, you know, in spite of your autism or anything. It's just, it doesn't work like that. And don't let anyone penalize your success.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on our show today.
Thank you for having me on. It's been so much fun.
Absolutely.